Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I hope you are all doing well today, because we have a genuinely significant batch of updates coming out of Kursk Oblast, deep inside Russian territory, along with a string of developments across the front and in the rear areas that together tell a fairly consistent story about where this war is heading in the coming months. Let's start in Kursk. A Russian military airfield there was visited, so to speak, by a coordinated Ukrainian drone operation. The setup itself is worth pausing on, because it reflects how far Ukrainian deep strike capability has evolved. A surveillance drone loitered over the airfield first, feeding back real-time imagery, while a separate strike drone, one of the newer loitering munitions in Ukraine's arsenal, closed in on the target. The result was the destruction of at least one Russian MiG-29 fighter jet, with a second aircraft reportedly damaged in the same strike. For context, a single MiG-29, even in its modernized Soviet-era form, is valued at roughly $25 million, and Russia has continued to invest in upgrading this airframe rather than replacing it wholesale, largely because production of newer platforms has not kept pace with wartime attrition. Losing even one of these jets on the ground before it ever gets airborne is a meaningful blow, both financially and operationally, because it removes a combat asset without Russia even getting the chance to use it defensively. Just as notable was the elimination of a Pantsir S-1 air defense system in the same general strike package. If you're unfamiliar, the Pantsir is supposed to be the system that protects other assets, combining short-range missiles with autocannons to shoot down incoming drones and cruise missiles. The irony of an air defense system needing air defense of its own is not lost on military analysts, and it underscores a recurring theme of this war. Layered Russian defenses are increasingly porous to small, cheap, maneuverable drones, no matter how much physical barriers or netting are added around high-value equipment. What makes this particular incident more concerning for Russian planners is the distance involved. This wasn't a strike happening at the immediate front line. It occurred roughly 100 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, deep enough that Russian commanders likely considered it a relatively safe rear area position. That assumption no longer holds. The drone used in this operation was reportedly a Ram 2X model, sometimes appearing with a single propeller, sometimes with two, depending on the specific variant. It's often compared to Russia's Lancet loitering munition, but by most accounts it offers improved range, more precise targeting optics, and more resilient communications links. This is a joint Ukrainian-German program, combining German engineering and investment with Ukrainian battlefield iteration, and it represents a broader pattern we're seeing. Western partners increasingly co-developing weapon systems with Ukraine, rather than simply donating finished equipment. The strategic value of this approach is that it builds sustainable domestic production capacity inside Ukraine, rather than creating permanent dependency on external stockpiles. That said, one persistent challenge remains scale. Ukraine currently fields an enormous and fragmented ecosystem of drone types, some highly effective, others considerably less so, and previous efforts, including those led by former Digital Transformation Minister Mikhailo Fedorov, to consolidate and standardize this production have had only partial success. The Ram 2X is a genuinely capable system, but its impact depends heavily on whether Ukraine can scale manufacturing fast enough to matter at the front rather than remaining a boutique, limited-run weapon. These same drone capabilities are increasingly being turned against Russian logistics rather than purely military hardware, and the effects are becoming visible in some unusual ways. Take the Chonhar Bridge, a key crossing point for Russian supply convoys heading into occupied southern Ukraine. Because the main bridge has been damaged in earlier strikes, Russia has routed traffic through a narrower pontoon bridge nearby, which has created massive bottlenecks, effectively single-direction traffic that backs up convoys of trucks for extended periods. Long stationary lines of vehicles are, of course, an extremely attractive target, and Ukrainian forces have exploited this repeatedly, striking convoys queued at the crossing with a mix of drone types, not always the Ram 2X, sometimes other loitering munitions carrying heavier payloads. The footage from these strikes, while I can't walk you through the visual details here, indicates convoys being partially destroyed mid-transit, which reinforces the broader point. Even when Russia repairs or reroutes around damaged infrastructure, the workaround itself often becomes the new vulnerability. There's also a notable escalation in strikes on rail infrastructure, connecting Russia to occupied Crimea. Ukraine's Special Operations Forces have claimed responsibility for hitting 13 railway bridges in a single coordinated campaign, describing them as key logistical arteries for resupplying the peninsula. This matters because railway bridges are considerably harder and slower to repair than standard road bridges, meaning any successful strikes here carry longer-lasting disruption than a typical road interdiction. There have been persistent reports, difficult to verify with full confidence, that earlier campaigns targeting Crimean bridges were quietly restricted at a command level due to internal disagreements over which units or commanders should get credit for such operations. If accurate, that would help explain why Russia had largely succeeded in repairing or bypassing bridge damage over the past period using temporary pontoon structures. The apparent resumption of a more aggressive bridge targeting campaign, if it holds, suggests Ukraine is again prioritizing the broader strategic goal of isolating Crimea over any internal bureaucratic friction. This strategy of choking off the peninsula extends to road transport as well. Russian officials publicly stated, on camera, that a key supply route connecting Russian territory to Crimea was fully secure and functioning normally. Within a short window afterward, a convoy of fuel trucks and commercial vehicles traveling that same route was struck by Ukrainian drones, with multiple vehicles destroyed and additional casualties among nearby personnel. What followed was almost as revealing as the strike itself. Russian military bloggers began openly mocking local officials who had made those reassurances, juxtaposing their public statements with footage of the same convoy in flames. This kind of friction between official messaging and battlefield reality has become a recurring feature of Russian information management around Crimea, and it's contributing to a broader reluctance among private trucking contractors to accept jobs along that corridor, regardless of the pay offered. The calculation for ordinary drivers is increasingly simple. No amount of money is worth the growing risk of not making it to the destination. Not every Ukrainian drone strike goes uncontested, and it's worth acknowledging the other side of this equation. Russian mobile air defense and electronic warfare teams have had real successes intercepting Ukrainian drones before they reach their targets, sometimes through jamming, sometimes through direct kinetic interception using improvised mobile teams. These successes are inconsistent and often depend heavily on how quickly a given unit can react, but they matter for a complete picture. This is very much an evolving contest between drone operators and counter-drone teams, with neither side holding permanent superiority. On the ammunition and storage side, occupied Mariupol experienced a significant explosion at what appears to have been a fuel or supply depot, while a Ukrainian long-range strike hit an industrial facility further into Russian-controlled territory, triggering a large fire that eyewitnesses described in detail. Ukraine has also reportedly been testing balloon-assisted drone launches, using prevailing winds to extend the effective range or improve signal transmission for drones heading toward Russian territory. An experimental approach that, if successful, could meaningfully extend strike depth without requiring longer-range platforms. On the prisoner exchange front, Ukraine confirmed the capture of 64 Russian soldiers in a single operation tied to a Ukrainian counteroffensive west of Huliaipole in Zaporizhzhia region, which reportedly resulted in the liberation of 5 villages. Ukrainian forces described a pattern in which Russian units attempting so-called flag operations, symbolic advances meant to claim territory for propaganda purposes, were systematically intercepted, with roughly 9 out of every 10 such attempts failing before troops even reached their intended positions. In this case, a larger group consolidated in a village found themselves surrounded and opted to surrender rather than risk continued exposure to drone strikes. There are also indications of significant internal developments within Ukraine's political and military leadership, with officials signaling that a major decision, potentially involving a change in senior military command, was imminent at the time of this report. Details remain limited, and any change of this magnitude would carry real implications for how operations are coordinated going forward. Meanwhile, Russia has continued retaliatory strikes on Ukrainian civilian and commercial infrastructure, including a UNICEF humanitarian warehouse and a major Ukrainian retail chain comparable to a large home goods and hardware superstore, with damages in the millions of dollars. This tit-for-tat targeting of commercial and logistics infrastructure on both sides, rather than purely military assets, has become a defining and unfortunate feature of this stage of the conflict. Russian naval drones, sometimes described as Grand-type systems, continue targeting commercial shipping near Odessa and occasionally Reni, with improving navigation and targeting precision, suggesting Russia has found ways to relay signals over longer distances, likely using Crimea as a relay point, even though it still lacks anything resembling the kind of resilient satellite communication network that Ukraine has benefited from. That's the full picture for this update. Thank you all so much for watching, for your continued support, and for helping keep this coverage going. Stay tuned for further developments as more details emerge.